Sam here from Keep On Coding. In this video, we're going to be going over one of the most important and most used data types in Java, which is the string. In many other languages, strings are defined as an array of characters, but in Java, every string is an object. So if we take a look at this example here, right now we're just printing out this is a Java object. So this right here, in quotes, is going to be your string. And when you have a string like this and it's not assigned to a variable or anything, it's called a string literal. So what Java does kind of behind the scenes is it takes this string, it converts it to an object, and then it passes that object into this system.out.print method. So how do you declare and initialize a string? Well, I'm glad you asked. Let me show you. So there are a couple ways to do this. Since strings are objects, you could just use the new keyword to do this. So you could do something like string as the data type. We'll call it myString, and we'll set it equal to new string. Just how you would initialize any object. And in the constructor of the object, this would be where the actual text would go. And we'll just do something like keep on coding. Now, since strings are so commonly used, the developers there were, I guess, generous and decided to give us developers a shorthand notation to do this. So what you could do is you could just simply say string myString2 equals, and then you would just put your string literal there and set it to the variable. So this is super convenient because who wants to write this line out every time? But the only problem that I have with this is that it can be a little bit confusing, especially if you are new to Java. You might be saying this and be like, hey, okay, so are strings objects or are they primitive types? And by primitive type, I mean something like an int or a char, kind of the built-in data types of Java. So that's just something that you have to keep in mind. Strings are a special case where you can initialize it like this. Another way, if you are confused, just know that since the first letter is capitalized, this is the standard syntax on how to create objects. So that's another way that you could remember. Now, one cool thing about strings is since they are built-in objects, they come with a bunch of really useful methods. And you should try and use these methods whenever necessary. Now, there are dozens of these. If you want, you could check out the Oracle documentation for it. Obviously, we're not going to go over every single one, but I am going to go over the basic and most useful ones, in my opinion. So the first method we're going to look at is equals, which tests for equality between two strings. So if we want to put this in an if statement, we'll do, so what we can try is we can do something like if myString equals myString2, then we'll print something out. So if they're equal, we'll print out strings are equal. But notice how I'm using the equal sign here, which is going to be incorrect. So what this does is it actually checks if the objects themselves are equal. But what we want to do is we want to check if the texts of the objects are the same. So what we'd have to do is we'd have to use equals. So how that would look like is you would use the dot operator. So you do myString dot. As you can see here, there are like a bunch of different methods that we could use. But what we want to do is use equals. And then as the argument to this, we just want to pass in the second string. Now, since they aren't equal, it shouldn't print anything out, and it doesn't. Let's go ahead and make these equal and test that out. So let's run that, and we see that strings are equal. Okay. All right, the next method we're going to look at is length, which you probably guessed it, gives you the length of a string. So again, we would just use that dot operator, dot length, and we see here it prints out an integer, which is the length of the string. The next one we're going to look at is char at. And what this method does is it takes in an integer and it returns the character at that integer, kind of what the name implies. And if you haven't noticed, a lot of these methods, you can kind of tell what they do by the name of it, which is really nice. So let's go ahead and print out char at 3. As we see here, it prints out a p. And strings are going to be the same as arrays, whereas the first character is going to start with 0. So in here, the k would be 0. The E would be 1, the E would be 2, and then the P would be 3. So that's just something to keep in mind. And just as you would with arrays, be careful to not index outside of the range of the string. Otherwise, you're going to get an exception thrown. All right, let's take a look at one more here, which is going to be dot index of. So what this does is it takes in a character and it returns what index that is at that character. So if we go ahead and print this out, we see that the O is at index 5. Now notice how their keep on coding has two O's in it, but the index of always will return either the first or the leftmost character that it runs into. So that's just something to keep in mind. So let's actually take a look at one more, because that's going to be a good transition into this next section. What we can do is we can use the split method. Now what split does is it takes in a string and it splits it up by a certain character or a certain string. So say we want to take keep on coding and we want to split it up where every time there's a space. So in here, we would just add in a space. And what it does is it takes it and it returns an array of strings. So let's go ahead and take this whole thing and set it equal to an array of strings. So we do string strs equals this whole thing. Now, in case you don't believe me, which I don't know why you wouldn't, let's go ahead and print this array out. I'm feeling kind of fancy today, so I'm going to use an enhanced for loop. So let's print out str and let's print out a space here just to make it a little bit more readable. So if we go ahead and run that, we see we have keep on coding. So let's try one more thing here. Let's try to change one of the indices to something else. So we'll do the element at index 2, which is going to be coding. We'll set that equal to coding with Sam. Now let's go ahead and copy this here and print that out. All right, so as we can see, it says keep on coding with Sam, which is what we expected. Now, one thing that we have to talk about is this line 10 here, where we're changing the string. So in Java, every string is immutable, meaning it can't be changed once it's created. So anytime it seems like you are mutating a string, what's going on under the hood is Java is actually creating a new string and returning that. From a developer's point of view, you don't really need to care about that, but from a performance point of view, which you should be aware of, it does make a difference. So for example here, in this line 10, it's not like, originally it's coding, right? It's not like Java's going in here and be like, oh, okay, let's go ahead and change this actual string. What it does is it takes the original string and it creates a brand new string. So what it does here, it says, okay, I'm going to create a new string called coding, coding with Sam. So it creates that string, and basically what it does is it takes this and sets it equal to this. Hopefully this makes sense. And then now this other string, nothing is pointing at it. This will get collected and reallocated with the garbage collector, so you don't need to worry about that. So this is just something to keep in mind, that you do have a little bit of overhead when you do try to mutate a string, because it's not really mutating it, it's creating a new one. Most of the time you're going to be all right, but just, maybe if you have a for loop that's running thousands of times, that's just something to be aware of if you can avoid it. All right, hopefully you found that video helpful. If you guys did like the video and would like to see more, make sure you hit me with a subscribe. Also, this video is a part of a collection of Java courses that I have. I have a playlist. I'll leave a link to that either in the description or the comments. So you guys should definitely check that out for more Java tutorials. But as always, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you guys in the next video.